Well, let's get on to our recap of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And if you're one of those people who I just mentioned haven't seen these movies, oops, we're going to recap it anyway. But we're not going to. Let's go to the source and let Indy himself tell you what the film is about.
That's right. He is a legend. The film is a legend. The recap is perfectly acceptable. No, the recap is great. I mean, because it is directly from the legend.
My next adventure starts like all good Lucasfilm adventures, by taking an adult character you know and love and making him a kid. But, am I doing kid stuff like going to the Olympics or reading Tarzan books? No. I'm back in the damn desert again. This time in Utah, spelunking with my fellow Boy Scouts. Not that there's a spelunking merit badge either, which is a shame because it's fun to say spelunking. Well, where I spelunked, I ended up eyeing a bunch of looters who came across the priceless Cross of Coronado. Would have been a shame if that symbol of the horrible mistreatment and abuse of indigenous people fell into the hands of some bad guys. So I snatched it and ended up on a wild chase on horseback until I ended up in a train that housed the magically marvelous Backstory Circus. Bullwhips, scars, snakes, all get explained. But somehow I never ended up with a nagging lifelong fear of getting speared in the crotch by a rhino horn. I end up back home only to find that Dad doesn't get my back. The looter's boss has bought off the law, and I have to give back the cross. Would have been a great time for Dad to speak up. Well, as you can imagine, I funneled this frustration all the way to 1938, where I killed a whole boatload full of people to get the cross back, because, you know, it belongs in a museum. Speaking of Dad, it turns out he's gone missing. And when Mr. Moneybags, Walter Donovan, tells me this, do I just suddenly go quiet and do nothing? No, Dad, I do something and hop on a plane with Marcus for Venice. Anyway, Donovan also told me that as sure as coconuts migrate, Dad was seeking the Holy Grail. Yes, the Holy Grail. From the Last Supper? Turns out Dad sent me his Grail diary, but I'd been too busy fending off the advancements of my students to check it out. But I'm sure it had all kinds of interesting Grail facts in it, and probably the Last Supper wine list. By now, you're probably thinking like I was. This is quite the sausage party, isn't it? Thankfully, Elsa Schneider shows up to give me someone to flirt with, and then we enjoy more spelunking. Catacombs beneath the Venice Library contain a clue as to the Grail's whereabouts, and just as Elsa and I get that information, rats. Not rats sent after me by villains, but rats that just are always under the streets of Venice. I mean, that's a good travel tip, kids. Don't go to Venice. Anyway, after our escape, we're then chased by the Order of the Cruciform Sword, which are sworn to protect the Grail at all costs, until, of course, they realize that I'm just there to rescue my dad. Then they calm down a lot. They also tell me my dad is in a castle on the German-Austrian border. And oh yeah, Elsa and I, doing it. Now, in order to get into the castle, I must call on my most prized skill in being an archaeologist. That summer I did community theater in 1916. I pretend to be Scottish, until I realize no one cares and I hit low-rent auto Preminger in the schnoz, which I should have done in the first place. Looking back, I actually can't believe I just shared that embarrassing moment with you. Anyway, turns out Nazis are behind my dad's kidnapping, and Elsa's one of them. I scrubbed and scrubbed my groin in the shower that night, I can tell you. But I did find Dad, and after he called me Junior, I shot a handful of Nazis at close range, which is really how I should have handled the guy who answered the castle door. It's not long, however, before Dad and I are tied up and more info is spilled, like Donovan is also a Nazi, and oh, Dad slept with Elsa. I scrubbed and scrubbed my groin in the shower that night, I can tell you! Dad and I escape on a motorcycle and eventually engaged in what can only be called plain Zeppelins and automobiles. This included a stop in Berlin to get the Grail diary back from Elsa and have a face-to-face with Hitler. Bad breath, by the way. No surprise. And did I mention Saul is back in the mix? He tells Dad and I that the Nazis now also know where the Grail is. So it's a game of who gets there first. And they have a slow-moving tank. Idiots. But Dad gets himself captured in sight of it. Idiot. It's on me then. just on horseback to dispatch all the Nazis and save Dad, which I do because I'm Indiana Jones. I do archaeology and Scottish accents. The Nazis arrive at the Grail Temple first and keep losing low-level guys to the temple's traps. Then we're caught. And I'm the one who has to get past the traps and retrieve the Grail. Why? Because Donovan shot Dad. Turns out Dad's diary scribblings weren't all, who's the hottest female archaeologist and why, although that's in there. His other nonsense helped me get past the traps and meet an ancient knight. I wasn't sure if the knight had ill intentions, but regardless, I was prepared with a shrubbery. Turns out he was all, drink from the right cup and you'll live. Donovan didn't take his advice, so he turned to dust. But I knew the cup of a carpenter, and was able to use it to save Dad. Elsa got all raccoon on me and was so distracted by the shiny grail she fell to her death like a Disney villain, leaving myself, Dad, Marcus, and Sala riding off into the sunset. Until the sun rose again, I guess, and I come back for 2 more adventures.
Well, that's everything you've wanted to know about The Last Crusade. Our apologies for spoilers if you're lame and haven't seen this movie.
I mean, you know, not everybody who hasn't seen the movie is lame. I mean, well, maybe most of them.
Yeah.
No.
As a father, you know when you pick up your kid at school and you see all the other kids, you're like, half these losers haven't seen Last Crusade. What a shame.